Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Seraphin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name. Familiar with the name.
Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public, and we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called the Kyle Seraphin Show.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Wednesday. It is September 11th, a fateful day that many of us will remember. About 23 years ago, about this time, maybe a little bit later in the day, maybe another 20 or 30 minutes, I recall sitting in Oklahoma in the ground floor of my college dorm room and getting that call from my mother to turn on the television and start watching horrific events that unfolded in this country. And we are a long ways from it. I think it's probably fitting today, although we didn't plan it this way. We have a guest. His name is Ryan Slate, and we're going to be talking about propaganda. We're going to be talking about the historical analogs for this time in America, and I think it'll be quite interesting. I think we've got a lot that we can cover as far as ground. So I look forward to talking to our guest. Before we do that, let's go ahead and say thanks to my friends over at Catholic Vote who support us, who keep this program independent. Ooh, punching the mic. It is faith, family, and freedom, the values that my friends over there deal with on a daily basis and are promoting. And if you're not getting your daily dose of news today, you can get it by going to catholicvote.org and signing up for the Loop. It will be the best 3-minute email that you get all day long. They've got debate coverage. They've got additional news and media that you might want to check into, stories that are useful, and their own news feed. Check out catholicvote.org. And again, we're really grateful that they support and sponsor our program because they allow us to do stuff like this. And here he is. Jeremy, good morning.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me. I know I've had the pleasure of having you on my show a couple times, so I appreciate coming back this way, man.
Yeah, indeed. So let me just throw this on the screen real quick so people can see it. This is a book that you've written called Command Your Brand. You're the CEO of this media company. And if people want to follow you on Twitter, let's put it right up front for our Twitter watchers. Jeremy Ryan Slate is his handle. And let's get into who you are as a person, my friend, because we've had a couple conversations on your end, but not on my here.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that wins Jeopardy in the privacy of my own home because I have so much useless knowledge inside my head that until the last couple of years didn't really matter. So I live in Northwest New Jersey, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like the Appalachia of New Jersey where I live. There's no cell phone service, anything like that. We heat our house with firewood. We have a couple dozen chickens out here. And I was somebody that I studied the Roman Empire in school. I was always very, very interested in it. And I got out with my master's degree in 2011, and I do what anyone with a job in the Roman Empire does. I started teaching theology at a Catholic school. So there we go. That it makes so much sense, right?
It does.
And in 2012, my mom ended up having a bad stroke, and it sent me through a lot of different things that led me to starting this media company in 2015. And I have a wife, 3 beautiful daughters, and we're just trying to make an impact out there, man.
We have the same situation with having daughters. I told my wife we were going to have sons, which is why I have daughters. I'm looking over here at our feed because we had an issue on Rumble. So give me just 1 second because I'm going to make sure it reconnects. Sometimes Rumble decides to disagree with us after agreeing with us right up front. So let's just make sure this data is sending through here. There it is streaming. Okay, folks, if you're watching us, the best is this. Jeremy, every single time something goes wrong, which is maybe like 1 in 25 streams, yeah, my audience always assumes the FBI is screwing with me and there's a van outside of my house.
I'm probably sure they're probably not far off though, man.
It's always a possibility, although I've never seen sort of like an information op that involved data interruption. What I have seen is obviously spying on people and sitting outside and doing that, or doing a collection on it. So I was a part of that. All right. So now, folks, if you're just joining us from Rumble, you missed out on an interesting intro, and you'll have to go back and watch it again, and we'll re-upload it properly. But everybody else, let's continue on. You taught at a Catholic, was it a Catholic high school? Is that what you said?
I taught at Catholic high school. I taught sophomores, by the way, and I'm a couple years away from 40, so you can imagine at like my early 20s that I looked like I was in high school. So it
you
was
still could pass for it if you got rid of the mustache.
For me. What's
yeah,
that?
if you got rid of the stash, you could still probably pass for 21 Jump
I don't
Street.
have facial hair that grows anywhere else on my face, man. This is it.
I sort of like that. We just watched 21 Jump Street the other day, or the crappy movie that what was it? Seth. What is that guy's name? It doesn't make a difference. Channing Tatum did it.
Channing Tatum.
And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Like, it's a horrible premise, and they don't look like high schoolers at all. At least not the way that I remember it. But I had the same experience on my surveillance team at one point in time where the guys were looking at me, and I had this beard, and they're like, "How can you see that far away?" And I was like, "Oh, my eyes are 20 years younger than yours." And they're like, "What?" And so I shaved. Like, the next day I go in, and they're like, "Oh my God, you look like you're about 24." And I was almost 40 as well. So I appreciate that. Let's talk about what made you study the Roman Empire. Why did you go get a master's degree? And you specifically were interested, it sounded like, in propaganda. How did that come about?
Yeah. So I was absolutely obsessed in undergrad with Alexander the Great. I had a really great professor. And I think, frankly, a lot of us are lacking great teachers in our life. And the thing that was cool about this guy is he made history a narrative, like something you could follow along. And I find that history people oftentimes they're too much in the detail. They're too pedantic. And to me, it made history very real. And if you see my office now, I look very crazy as I have a bust of Alexander the Great on my desk. I actually proposed to my wife in Athens back in 2013. So I was very into Alexander the Great. I have all these books on my shelf relating to him as well. And I read this one obscure article by a Jesuit priest, Father Cuthbert Laity was his name, that was written around the turn of the century. And he writes this weird article that after the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, after Augustus beats Mark Antony, he goes from Actium, which is in eastern Greece, to the city of Alexandria in northern Egypt, and he prays before the sarcophagus of Alexander the Great. And I'm like, wow, that's really strange. And Alexander had been dead at about 300 years at this point in time, but he goes and prays before the sarcophagus. And it sent me down this journey of figuring out, why was he doing this? It was a very strange thing. And what I realized is Augustus had realized if he was going to achieve the type of power he wanted to achieve, he had to create ruler worship. And Alexander was very good at taking the religion of the East from Babylon and mixing it with the way Greeks and Macedonians looked at divinity. And because of that, he created this incredible worship cult throughout the empire. So when Augustus saw this, he realized he had to pattern himself off of this guy. And actually, that's what my graduate thesis ended up being on. I wrote over 100 pages on ruler worship. So to me, I think it's very interesting to realize, though our politicians and people have quote unquote changed and civilized in some ways, they use a lot of the exact same types of propaganda to control us. Just, nobody's offering offerings to Joe Biden on his birthday, hopefully.
Hopefully not. Although the media seems to be some version thereof. So the idea of a cult of personality, you've traced at least back to ancient Greece, is what we're saying. And it probably even went back further because
I'm tracing it back to Babylon before that, because the Babylonians had this process called proskinesis. And proskinesis wasn't just kneeling before a ruler. It was actually laying your entire body on the ground because you weren't able to even look at him. And that's the major thing that Alexander starts having Macedonians do. And they're kind of like, well, I grew up with you. This is kind of weird. But it becomes a very acceptable process by the people actually being ruled by Alexander, not by his companions.
What does that do to the people in the civilization that have this ruler? What does it do to their mindset? What does it do to the way that they look at their ruler, as a figurehead?
I think it comes down to agency, because what ends up happening is a lot of us realize they realize they don't have agency because everything is dependent on what this person is going to do. And if you even look at how Augustus becomes the first emperor of the Roman Empire, Rome is three things. It's a kingdom, then it's a republic, and then it's an empire. And Augustus is the last character of the republic phase and the first character of the empire phase. And Rome had literally been through about 100 years of civil war leading up to this. So the people are very beat up and they just want peace. And Augustus brings them peace. And he's a brilliant guy because what he actually threatens to do is retire. And they think if there's going to be retirement, well, we're going to go back to a time of civil war. So they actually demand that Augustus stay in place and rule them. Now, he won't take the title of emperor right away. He's going to take this title of princeps, or first citizen. So he's going to leave everything in place. The Senate's in place. The political offices, which are on something called the Cursus Honorum, are still in place. And there's still consuls that are elected every single year. But now there's this new office ahead of the Senate called the princeps, or the prince. It's where we get our word prince from. And he'll take the word imperator later on, which is the victorious general. It's where we get our word emperor from. But literally, he threatens to retire knowing that the people see peace when they see him. So it really is creating this idea of people cannot function or do not have agency without this person. And Augustus lives into his 70s. And I think that's just really important as well, because the further away people get from freedom, the easier it is to then bring them into the next thing. So the transition to really becoming an empire is a really easy thing. And I think you could say that too about a lot of the political situations that we've had here. If you look at, the further we get away from the progressive era of 1913 being a very pivotal year where we get the Federal Reserve, we get income tax, and we also lose the 17th Amendment. Well, the further you get away from how that republic functioned, people don't remember what that was like. They don't remember money actually being worth what it was supposed to be worth and things like that. And I think it becomes very easy to control people in that way.
How long or how many people do you think are out there looking at 1913 as one of those fatal wounds that it took us 100 years to realize?
I don't know. And I feel like it's one of those things that if you say it, they're like, oh, you're one of those crazy conspiracy theorists. And I'm like, no, I actually just read history. And I'm like, well, that's kind of strange.
Well, and the fact is that we had a really neat system. We had founders that were educated in the same sort of way that you were. They looked at the same sort of historical analogues and tried to build a system that was going to be superior and try to head off those human problems that we all kind of interact with. The three problems of utopia always end up being, there's either an imperfect land, there's an imperfect people, or there's an imperfect system. And they tried to do all the things they could do. And then you realize, then we just cut the legs out from that really brilliant system. In 1913, the direct election of senators was that the 17th?
17th Amendment, yes. And 16th Amendment was income tax. So
you end up giving the federal authorities all the things that the anti-federalists basically fought tooth and nail to keep from them. So we gave it all up, and then nobody noticed it. But it took a long time, and obviously we're there now. Let's talk a little further.
And you get to a point where people don't remember it being any different. So Why would they demand something that's different than their reality? And I think that's Ronald Reagan had always said that, freedom is never more than a generation away, because you don't have to get that far away before there's no one that remembers how it used to be.
I think that is critical. And it's very interesting to think that Augustus did that exact same thing, basically outlived it in his own time to be able to make people demand something that they, one generation earlier would have fought against.
Well, it's the thing that's interesting as well, and I think this actually coincides a lot with our war on terror, if you want to look at it that way. The Punic Wars, which are around the 2nd century BC, Rome really militarizes during this time period, and everything in their society becomes about winning these wars. In fact, there's a politician, Cato the Elder, who after every speech will end every speech with "Carthago delenda est," or Carthage must be destroyed. So the entire society militarizes against the Carthaginians, and because of that, they start to change the rules on political offices. They start to change the rules on what we can do around term limits. And then it becomes very easy that once that war is over, well, the politicians want to function the same way, and they want to continue to give themselves a lot of power. And that is how a republic falls apart.
Let's talk about that in terms of the war on terror, because I think that is a really, really pivotal thing, especially today being September 11th. How do you see that lineup? Is it 1-to-1? Is it similar techniques? Do you think that the politicians that were involved in what they were doing, the George Bush types, the Dick Cheneys, saw this as a blueprint, or is this just the way that human beings always kind of handle this sort of thing?
That's tough, man, because I think there's certain aspects of it, especially if you look at the Patriot Act that they had tried to pass years before. Unless you get the right emergency, you can't do it. So I think there's that part of it where the powers of the state have always wanted to have that power. But I think as well, you look at somebody like George Bush, and one of my favorite writers, a guy named Jim Mars, calls George Bush a post turtle. He got up on top of that fence post and he didn't get there by himself, and you really just want to help the poor creature down. That he's somebody that I don't know that George Bush really was actually running anything at all. I think it was more about somebody like Dick Cheney. And Dick Cheney scares the hell out of me. And I think that's why you even look at him shouldering up with somebody like Kamala Harris. Well, that tells you a lot about who she is. Dick Cheney is the establishment state of power, and that establishment state of power wants to continue to flow more power to itself, and it's going to continue to look for different ways to do that. So I think if you want to look at that in comparison with, how Rome didn't really have a standing army before the Punic Wars, and then they start to have a standing army. And then not long after the end of the Punic Wars, you have a military reformer come in, this guy named Gaius Marius, and they had been a limitation on holding Rome's highest office, which is called the consul. There's 2 every year because Romans don't want one person to hold power, so they wanted to split it up. You're supposed to have 10 years in between holding each consulship. Marius holds the consulship 70 times, or 7 times for a total of 70 years. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is each time it's because of an emergency. Well, first, there's this tribe called the Cimbri, and we need to raise a military force to beat the Cimbri. And he hasn't done it yet, so let's give him another consulship. And let's give him another consulship. Now there's this general named Jugurtha, and we have to take out Jugurtha because this is an emergency. We really need to handle it. And the thing that ends up happening after something like that is terms of office don't matter anymore. You're starting to see the rule of law break down. And you get to a guy like Sulla that comes after him. He creates this process called proscription, where he's actually putting his enemies' names on a tablet in the center of the city. And if you brought their head, you would give a reward to Sulla. And that creates upheaval. So you really see the rule of law break down. Now, we're not having heads in the streets, but, we've had cancel culture and things like that, which I think maybe we're a little bit neater in how we, kill people politically or in the media and not actually do it. So I think if you look at that, we're seeing kind of this breakdown in the rule of law, much how they saw in the late Republic.
Did we see that during the Red Scare, you think, in this country as well? Sort of the original cancel culture where people would be accused of being a communist or the McCarthyism?
I think you could very much compare that to now as well, because you could compare it to the whole Russia saga, right? If you are an agent of Putin, if you are this, you are that, then, you've been pushed out of polite society. And I think you even look at during the Red Scare, people couldn't get jobs in Hollywood and all these different places. And, you look at people like Oppenheimer, it's possible the guy actually did have communist sympathies. So you also wonder how much truth there was to some of that.
Yeah, I guess there's almost always some truth to it. The question is it effective? I'm looking at the thing that's going on with Tenet Media right now. Are you following that at all?
I was on Tenet Media back in March. I did not get my rubles yet.
You're waiting on rubles still. Okay. The thing that kind of concerns me in that scenario is that you can pay people and discredit them with your money without ever changing what their opinion necessarily was. And I haven't seen any argument that the DOJ has made that says they were specifically tasked with fill-in-the-blank messaging, and therefore they receive payment. What they said is they received payment and their messaging was sympathetic, but it doesn't mean that they changed their mind per se.
I think that's an important part of it, but I think you actually posted this, by the way. I think the more important part is who did that give them the opportunity to now have FISAs on? I think that's what it's actually about, because now you have the opportunity to jump from Dave Rubin or Tim Pool or any of these guys and see, well, who are they talking to, or who are they texting with? And I think that's a really, really, really important part of it, is now you have the ability to control the entire opposition. That's a honeypot. And I think as well, we've seen that throughout history as well. You can set people up there's a revolt right before Julius Caesar takes power in Rome called the Saturninus revolt. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is Caesar actually lets these guys off. He doesn't want to put them to death. And that actually ends up getting Caesar marked now, because now he has this guy named Cato the Younger. We mentioned his famous relative earlier, that his entire career, no matter what Caesar does, he's going to try and block him, whether it's right or wrong, because he sees him as an agent of Saturninus. And I think what starts to happen is people start saying, well, we need to do these things that are out of the ordinary because we're saving democracy here, right? And that is, if you look at even the career of Cato the Younger, much of what happens with Caesar and much of what destroys the Republic is because of what Cato the Younger did to, quote unquote, stop him, because this is an extraordinary time and we need to stop this person.
Is there a hedge against stuff like this? Is there a way that you can kind of keep this human instinct to keep repeating these patterns that we've seen throughout history, whether it be Roman or even early American?
It's tough, man, because I think the problem you get into is people in power oftentimes operate this way. And I think the people that don't want to be in power because they're too busy running a business or doing something constructive in society don't want to have those political positions. So I think that is kind of the dangerous part of it. But I think as well, it comes down to actually knowing these things, because the biggest surprise to me in having these conversations about the Roman Empire for the last year is that literally no one knows it. And if you went back to the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, like this would have been a normal part of education. But really around the Industrial Revolution, which coincides very well with the Progressive Era, we saw education change dramatically, because what ends up happening is you need factory workers, you need soldiers, you need people that are not going to be thinking and just delivering the next thing that needs to get done. So you lose rhetoric, you lose ancient culture and history, and you just get down to the basics of, well, how can I get someone to perform a factory job? And we've never really come back from that in education. If you look at literacy levels, we reached a high literacy level around the 1920s and 30s, and we've actually gone downwards ever since. And there's a lot of different studies on that that show that it's dropped so much. So I think the thing that's interesting is we don't want a populace that can make decisions based on the information they need to have, and we're just going to keep the information from them.
What do you think the change was in the 1930s that had us start sliding down that literacy hill?
I think it starts earlier. Oftentimes, I think when we see the result of something, we see something that started years before. I think so much of it has to do with the Progressive Era. I put a lot of the things on the shoulders of Woodrow Wilson. And I know people will say, the 19th Amendment and things like that. I really don't care that much about that. I kind of think if we live here, we pay taxes, we have the right to vote for different things. But I think if you look at a lot of the different things that happened in that era, specifically the Federal Reserve, the 17th Amendment, and income tax, that's a really big thing, because we want people now that we can just milk for money and we can just use as human resources. And we don't want those human resources to be educated, or we don't want those human resources to be able to get out of line. So what are we going to do? We're going to keep them stupid. And I think that's the number one thing you look at. Now, you'll see things with, the Rockefellers getting into the medical industry and things like that compound that. But I think if you really want to look at it, that progressive time period, specifically under Woodrow Wilson, is a lot of what we're dealing with today.
When we do these historical overlays and we try to say, okay, are we in this period that's very similar to what the Romans went through? Is it very similar to what the Greeks did, or, the Dark Ages, or take your pick that you want to do an overlay? I'm kind of interested right now. And I was, for full disclosure for people, I studied Latin for 6 years, so my Latin is way in my rearview mirror, but it was there. And I was in the Junior Classical League, so I was part of
Catholic school guy too? Because I studied it in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, all the way through grad school.
Yeah, mine was 5th grade, 6th grade, and then I took a little break, and then I did it in high school. So Jesuit schools, same sort of story there. And what I don't remember thinking about was, what were the average Roman people about? You hear about the great leaders, you hear about the people that are up there giving the speeches, you heard about the people in the Senate, the people that seize power, etc. Generals, take your pick. What were the Roman people, and how similar are they to that sort of decline? Did they have a decline in awareness and education? Obviously, they didn't have the media that we do today.
So literacy is never very high if you don't have money. I think that's one thing you have to consider. So if you weren't part of the money classes in Rome, there's kind of two political parties in Rome. There's what's called the populares, which are people that do things for the regular people or the populace, and the optimates are the great ones. Those are typically the people that do things for the rich and powerful. And if you even look at how Rome's voting system is broken down, we call it a republic, but it's not a republic for everyone, if that makes sense. It's really just a republic for those that already had money and power. The voting system breaks down, and it would take a lot more time to explain this. So I recommend people look this up and do some research. But the voting method was called centuries, and this lines with how the army was put together. So basically, it was supposed to originally be groups of 100, but they don't really hold to that definition. And what ends up happening is you would vote based on your political class or based on your rank and money class. And the highest classes held the most votes. So they would always swing things their way. The lowest classes typically could not swing a vote, because even if they all got together, they didn't have enough in their century to actually vote for that, the way things were put together. And so what ends up happening is we call it a republic, but it's not a republic for everyone. It really is an oligarchic system through its entire extent. So I think that's the thing you have to consider, is when it becomes an empire for the regular people, they wouldn't really have seen a change. It wouldn't have been different for them. It would have been pretty much the same system they had lived through, back since Rome had 7 traditional kings when it's founded in 753 BC. So I think that's the thing that's interesting, is when we talk about Rome's republic and Rome's empire and a lot of those different things, we don't consider that typically it's only for the people that had money and power. It's not really for the regular people.
Do you think that's any different today?
I don't think it's that much different. I don't think it's that much different, because the problem is your people at the highest level are kind of just going in one direction. Do you know what I mean? Like they've got their Overton window and they're kind of sliding far in one direction. And for the rest of us, if we all get together and vote, whether that's accepted and allowed to be, right? Like we saw what happened in the last election. I just think voting's been kind of a sham for a really long time, maybe since Kennedy. And I think that's what you have to consider is how much control we've actually had and how long has it been since we've had control.
What do you think about the disruptive technology of the internet? Obviously, you and I make money doing that at this point, that we have this spread and this flow. Regular people can go back and find out what politicians said in the 90s, which you couldn't do even probably 15 years ago. That wasn't an option for a regular person to go do. How does that affect us?
Well, yes and no, because I just did an episode yesterday of a guy named Daniel Turner. He has a company called Power of the Future, and he does a lot around alternative energy, which is really cool stuff. And the thing you run into, and I try to prepare for this interview, is I'm like, what are the biggest false beliefs or conspiracy theories people have around energy? Good luck finding it if you don't actually possess that energy yourself. That's what I ran into, is it was very hard to actually find the information I wanted to prepare for the interview. So part of what we're running into is the information we need to make a decision is being removed. Now, there's a positive side of that. The positive side is places like where we are right now, which is Rumble, and also a lot of what's been happening on X, though I'm still not sure how much I trust Elon Musk, is we have the ability to have these open conversations and actually talk about a lot of these things. And I think when you look at whether it's the fall of Rome's Republic or the fall of its empire, people wouldn't have known, right? They just would have been a totally effective whatever's happening to them. I think we do have an ability now to be caused like we never have in any time in history because of this free flow of information. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not continually fighting for our free speech every day, but we do have the ability to actually discuss these things where for Romans, life would have just been happening to them.
I think that's fair. I want to pivot into information ops and propaganda and get a definition on that. Before we do that, let me just throw this up here. I'll give you a chance to take a drink of coffee. Folks, if you want to support our program, you can go to kyleserafin.com. That'll take you to our locals community. You can sign up there as a subscriber, or you can sign up as a free member. Take your pick. Make sure you guys check that out if you want to get involved in our conversation tonight with another person who knows something about information ops. My buddy George Hill, who used to work at the NSA. He was an FBI intel analyst, and he worked in the military doing similar things. So we're going to continue talking about it. Let's do a discussion about propaganda. What is propaganda, and how do you define it?
So propaganda is a tool that's used in order to control people's thought process, decisions, and how they get through their daily life. And I think the best propaganda is something that's often controls people without them realizing it's propaganda. And the thing you have to consider is in Rome, they don't really have a press. Much of what you're getting actually comes from the central power. So you have to think about how do you control people's daily lives? And one of the number one things that's used, I've read a number of books about this, is about currency. Because if you think about the money people use, they use it every single day, and that is how they're going to have an experience with you. So if you want to look at during the empire period, you'd have the head of an emperor on one side, and maybe you'd have the symbol of a god on the other side, or you'd have Rome's first emperor, Augustus, on the other side. You can even get even further into it. As many times that would be like a sideways face, often like how our money is on a coin. But if the eyes are looking up, well, he's looking up to the heavens and saying that the gods are more powerful than him. If the eyes are looking forward, well, he's saying that he himself is a god and he has more power than regular people. So it gets to the level of the money that you're using every single day without thinking about it is something that is controlling how you look at things. And you have to look at the original purpose of money, especially in the Roman Empire, is it was to pay the military. So the person whose face is on that coin is now paying for your service. So that's an important part as well. Now, another big thing are statues. And Augustus is really the one, since he's the first of his kind that does this, is he covers the entire empire with statues of himself. And he's only ever about somewhere between 30 and 40 years old. Though after he gets in his 50s and 60s, he's not a very healthy man. They often were thinking Augustus was going to die and who was going to come after Augustus. But these statues always showed him as immortally young. And I think that's what's interesting too. Something that Augustus does too, which is brilliant, is after his adopted father, Julius Caesar, dies, he sees a comet go across the sky. And he says, well, that comet going across the sky, that's my adopted father going to join the gods in heaven. And what does he do? He creates a worship cult to the divine Julius. So if Julius is divine, I must have some divinity myself. So they're often trying to tie themselves to divine beings in order to do that. And I think you could see that a lot of how celebrity culture is now, is people are tying themselves to, whether it's the Kardashians or this person or that person, they're kind of creating this idea of they are known by, liked by, related to this group that you cannot reach. And I think that's the really important thing, is the separation, right? Because when there's this idea of divinity in Rome, it's something that can't be reached by the regular people, But if their rulers can eventually reach it, they're different and better than them. And I think that's often what we see in a lot of our celebrity culture and even how politicians use celebrity culture now.
So we hear things now calling the sort of information ops, 5GW, fifth generation warfare. But this concept of trying to use information to manipulate public opinion, that's been going on forever, basically.
Thousands of years.
Yeah. And it's and then you just build a backstory for it. Like you say, the comet, it's easy. Who can say otherwise, right? Nobody can deny it.
Even if you want to look at what Augustus does, is the best documented time period we have in Roman history is the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. I don't do the woke history terms with BCE and CE, by the way.
Okay. That's fair.
So kind of that 100 years before Christ and that 100 years after Christ are actually our best documented time period in Roman history. And most of the reason why is because a lot of the cultural programs are actually being paid for by the Emperor Augustus. He's pays for the Aeneid, which is one of the most famous written works of Roman history, to actually tie Romans to the Trojans. He pays for so much of the poetry, like the works of Ovid and things that are done during this time period. So much of the culture that's built is built on things he wants people to believe. And that's what you really have to understand, is that becomes a part then for the next 500 years of Roman culture.
I see this sort of analog right now talking about that, where people believe the good things come from the government. That seems like a very leftist kind of thing. It's the opposite of what people in America sort of used to think.
Yeah.
Where do you see that shift happening as you kind of look at this sort of historical overlay on our American system? When did people start thinking that we had more of a king than an actual president who's supposed to just execute the rules from the legislature?
As I said, I think there's a shift around Wilson, but I think if you really want to look at it, I think it's more around FDR. Like number one, because we don't get rid of a president during a time of war, right? So we might as well keep the war going. I think that's important. And he serves, almost serves 4 terms, which I think is quite interesting. So
how many people have forgotten that too? That you
right.
talk about people not knowing the history of their own, like forget the Roman history. Most people don't even know American history.
Yeah.
And if you tell them, it's like, look, the guy served till death. He was president for life.
Well, even a wilder one, which nobody talks about, and then I'll get back to this, is Gerald Ford. You look at a guy like Gerald Ford, he's on the Warren Commission, right? You have Nixon in his reelection campaign has Spiro Agnew as his VP. Spiro Agnew is removed for some sort of a tax issue. He's replaced with Gerald Ford, who's the Senate minority leader. And then Nixon's removed, and Gerald Ford's president. Nobody voted for him. Like, that's insane. But I guess getting back to FDR, you even look at things like the public works programs and a lot of different things. Like so many of the social programs we live with nowadays, including Social Security, came out of FDR. So if you want to look at the system we have now, someone like Woodrow Wilson is more like your Julius Caesar character, someone that ends the previous thing. And then you have someone like FDR is more like your Augustus, the person that starts the next thing, because this is a different system than we had previously. And that's why oftentimes when I'm having these conversations, people want to talk about the fall of Rome's Republic. My opinion is America's Republic fell a very long time ago, and we've operated as something else for quite a long time. I don't know if you want to call it an oligarchy or closer to a monarchy or whatever it might be, but presidential power has become supreme in this land. And that's why when I look at where we are, Kyle, the thing that I'm most concerned about is what's called Rome's 3rd century crisis. The time period right after the death of the son of Marcus Aurelius, Commodus, creates this time period which basically you have Roman generals declaring themselves in charge, and their armies are fighting each other for whoever gets to be emperor. There's no actual succession. And what ends up happening then is they're debasing their currency, because whoever has the most currency can pay their army is the one that's going to have the most power. So you have the silver coin, by the time you get to the 270s, is only about 4% silver, which it had been closer to 100% at the beginning of the 3rd century. So you have currency and inflation going wild. By 284, you're at 15,000% inflation. And in addition now, because you need these troops to show your control, well, they start bringing in barbarian troops to serve in the army. And those barbarian troops are much of what turns on Rome for barbarian invasions. So they actually create their own problem through this immigration gone wild and this military opportunism, and totally debasing their currency. To me, we're not there yet, but I think that's a direction that we're headed, because our money is not worth anything. It's not tied to anything. And we've had over 8 million people cross the southern border. I guess, and if you watched the debate last night, maybe as much as 11 in the last 3 years under Biden.
Mm-hmm. No, and it seems intentional too. Or it just seems like the pattern that human beings fall into, and I'm not 100% sure which it is. But I do agree with you about that movement towards. So is this the American empire stage? Can we just admit that the republic is not really functioning, at least not the way that it was designed?
And I think that's the interesting part, because you look at what's happening with Trump. That's a lot of like what happened with Julius Caesar. The difference is Caesar didn't lay down his military force; he just entered Rome with it. Trump surrendered himself to the legal forces, even though he may not have agreed with it. So a lot of that is how the republic fell. And we kind of see the moneyed class and the political class playing out that whole thing. But I think it's really just a play for people to watch. I think the bigger problem is we've been an empire for a very long time, and we're doing what empires do. We are, our wars of conquest have ended quite a long time ago. So now we're just trying to maintain what we have out there. We spread our military thin. We're spending money we don't have. And eventually, when you don't have a currency and you don't have borders, you don't have a country anymore. And if you look at how the Roman Empire in the West falls, the East is going to last until 1453. But if you look at how the Roman Empire in the West falls, it eventually just transitions to becoming a barbarian kingdom. There is no falling and mashing of teeth and flames of the city. Sure, there are barbarian invasions throughout the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, but the way that 476 date comes from is the Eastern Roman Empire. Justinian tries to reunite the empire with his general Belisarius through conquest. And they destroy what had become a barbarian kingdom, because the last emperors in the last 100 years are just propped up by barbarian generals. They don't actually have any control.
So we're talking about the fall from within, essentially internalizing your own enemy. And we're seeing some pretty good analogs of that happening right now, right? How does that manifest in sort of the cultural experience for the Romans? Did they notice that there was no more Rome, that the Roman culture was essentially barbarian? Is that part of the game?
I think the thing you have to consider as well is barbarians and Romans had lived together for hundreds of years. And I think when we think of barbarians, they're not the way they're portrayed culturally. I think, barbar is the word for beard, is where that comes from. I saw you touching your beard there. But if you even look at during the time of Caesar, they're a lot more civilized than people want to believe. It's just the system is so dramatically different than Romans that they call them barbarians. And a lot of what they do is raiding. But what they start to actually settle within the empire because they want Roman citizenship and they want what the empire could provide for them. And one of the big things in the empire as well is you have the social programs of the grain dole. So these people are coming in, and in 212, Caracalla gives about 30 million people citizenship that just live in the Roman Empire, even though they're not citizens. So now you have barbarians and other people that are able to actually get the social programs of Rome. And if you also served in the military, you could get citizenship. You had to do it for 20 or 30 years and not die. But you have a lot of these people starting to want to get the goodness of what Rome could give them. And it starts to bankrupt the state and starts to crush the state under its weight. And if you look at people then taking the money and the currency and adding other metals to it in order to pay the military, so the money's getting destroyed. Well, for regular people, they would have for a long time been working alongside different tribes within the city of Rome that you would see as barbarian. So for them, just to change the old boss for the new boss isn't that big of a deal, because if you even look at how Alexander the Great controlled his empire, the Babylonian Empire was broke up into what's called satraps. They were kind of like governors of areas. He doesn't destroy that system. He just puts new places in new people that are his people and control those places. It's going to be much of how the Roman Empire fades out. You're not going to have the system itself break down. You're just going to have barbarians and other people holding what are Roman positions of governors and proconsuls and consuls and quaestors. These positions aren't going to go away. They're just going to be held in different ways, and it's going to kind of fade into a barbarian system.
It's like maybe having a Chinese person on your city council in San Francisco, or letting illegal aliens take elected office, even though theoretically they shouldn't even have a right to be here, kind of thing. I guess it's incrementalism, though. It's incrementalism.
It is. And I think that's the really interesting way in describing it is, I think oftentimes we want to look at how empires fall and we want to look for these, great cataclysmic events, but very often it is more incremental than most. If you want to look at the most famous work on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, written in 1776, he cites over 200 different reasons that the empire fell. It's so many gradual things that you just need a little bit of political upheaval and it's just gonna take those things and exacerbate them. And I think that's what you really have to consider is there are so many different causes that contribute to the decline of an empire. But I think once again, your two major ones are borders and currency. And if you don't have those two things, you do not have a country or an empire of any sort.
And then we did both of those things.
Yes.
In fairly short order.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what you have to consider is currency as it loses value, right? Like let's say you have people coming into your country illegally or in large numbers, even legally. They're not culturally from that place, right? Like you go to Italy or you go to France because you want to go to Italy or France, or you want to enjoy that culture. Those cultures are dying away because of the borders aren't really in existence anymore. So what starts to happen is those people are in those places because of the currency they're getting, right? And as the currency loses value and as the currency loses primacy, well, they don't need that system anymore. And that's what I think you have to look at is when the currency is destroyed and the people that are in that place are no longer from that place, well, they don't need that system anymore, right? So they can just build a new system. And I think that's the direction you head eventually.
Let's do some looking into the crystal ball because there's a lot of doomsayers right now. Are you optimistic, pessimistic? Where do you sit when you look into the future? You got young kids like I do.
Yeah. I'm optimistic for reasons we talked about before. And the reason is like, number one, I think we're having a spiritual awakening in this country like we've never seen before. The amount of friends that I know that now go to church that couldn't have given, two, what's a couple years ago is kind of awesome. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one part of it is we're starting to see a bit of awakening in this country where people are actually caring more about how they're leaving the place behind and what they're doing for the places they live in. I think the other part about it is the free flow of information. We have for so long, we've kind of lived in this simulation, I guess you want to say, in a lot of ways. Not that I'm promoting simulation theory here, but I'm saying we've lived in kind of this simulated reality. And I think what you've seen now, we start to see cracks in this. And Rumble is a huge part of this. And X is also a big part of this. We can also have these conversations. And even as well, I don't know about you, but I know local communities, to me, seem like they're starting to get together again. And I think the pandemic was a big part of this. To me, I think the pandemic was supposed to be the axe that brings everything down. But I think in actuality, it's the thing that opened our eyes, right? It showed us what's happening in our schools. It brought people together because they realized if you want to change in your local area, well, it involves your mayor, it involves your town council, it involves a lot of these different things. So I think to me, and maybe this is just in my small bubble in northern New Jersey, it seems like people care again. And I think that's very, very important. And there's people that I politically were on different sides of the fence, but now we're in support of freedom. And I think that's a really interesting thing of where we're at in history. For Romans, things were just fading out, man. They didn't have a different way to communicate. They didn't have broad communication. And I think if we ever lose things like Rumble or we lose things like X, we are screwed. But I think we are in a point in history where something can still be done about it because we have a freer flow of communication than we had before.
So the American experience has been sort of this movement of more and more centralization of power. Would that be more or less?
I would agree with that, yes.
And more or less centralization of information, because we've seen first it was the universities. They were the one that controlled the books. That's where people went to go get the learning and get the information. And then we had media companies rise, and they were the ones that were doling it back out. So you'd get this educated class of journalists or whatever. My dad was a journalist and calls them kind of like this kind of dark priesthood where people think they get ordained to give you the truth, which is obviously not the case. And then we have this devolution right now that's happening where it's getting Balkanized, and it's funny because Balkans were, kind of a disaster. And we use that word, but things are devolving back down to the communal levels where it comes to talking to your neighbors, like you talk about church communities and so on, and sort of micro pockets of sharing information, of looking in and saying, hey, I know a little bit about this. You're interested in Rome, and I was actually interested in Greece, and I lived overseas, and I've got this experience from being in Africa, and we can kind of put our heads together and realize there's some better ways, and they've been out there that didn't exist. Yes. Maybe even 100 years ago, that wasn't an opportunity. And that makes you feel positive.
I think so, because if you look at it, just once again comparing it to the fall of previous things, communication goes down to the point that no one can talk about anything. You want to look at where things were at in Weimar Germany. You want to look at even during the First World War, the Alien and Sedition Acts are insane for the ability to communicate disappearing. So I think that the fact that we can actually talk about it, and talking can lead to thinking, which can lead to doing, I think that's the direction we're headed. And I think it involves people getting involved in your election board. It involves people getting involved in your town because, we've federalized a lot in this country, but I think people seem to forget we have a 10th Amendment. And I think that's even, if you look at what's happened with the Roe v. Wade decision, well, the Supreme Court was just looking at it and say, well, all powers not enumerated to the federal government are relinquished to the states. And that's exactly what happened in this situation. So I think if what we're doing, hopefully, is getting less federal and getting more back to having a 10th Amendment in states' rights, because that is the only way you can make this thing work. Because if you look at the structural integrity of the Roman Empire in the 3rd century, what starts to happen is the central power can't control the whole thing now because it's gotten so big that the job of an emperor just becomes with his army running around the entire empire, his entire career, and barely living at Rome. So then you have a break-off empire in the west that happens, which is the Gallic Empire. You have a break-off empire in the east, which is the Palmyrene Empire. And then you have in the north, you have these barbarian tribes coming down. Things break off when central power really can't control them. And I think what ends up happening is, if you look at our Constitution, the way it's put together, our founders thought of that, and they had smaller power sectors in states that could do things themselves. And I think if we get back to that and realize that the federal government isn't doing everything for us, we're in good shape, man. But I think the problem, once again, is the people in power will do things that give themselves power. So I think it comes to getting them voted out. I think it comes to handling our law enforcement organizations. You look at how the FBI, CIA, DOJ, all these things have been weaponized against the American people. We need to get back to a place where the people are actually in control of their government.
Was there a secret police or anything of that sort that we could kind of draw some parallels to from the Roman Empire?
The Praetorian Guard, I think, oftentimes is looked at as kind of just being the protectors of emperors, but oftentimes they were public works. They were the intelligence organization. They were actually in charge of how much grain people got as well. Mm-hmm. And if you look at in the empire, there's 13 different emperors that actually killed by the Praetorian Guard. They often function as this power behind the power that steps out only when they don't like the way things are going. This guy Caracalla, he's a little bit crazy, so we're going to kill him. Or this guy Caligula, he's a little bit crazy, so we're going to kill him. Now, if you read into these people more, right, like there's a lot of debauchery and things around a guy like Caligula, but you have to wonder, often a lot of the actions he took looks like they were actually to embarrass the Senate. So it's one of those things that you wonder, are there things missing in the history we're given? Are some of those things about him made up to make him look bad? I don't know. But if you look historically, when the Senate or when the powered classes are upset, that is when an emperor dies. And we then think badly about that person after the fact because the press is controlled.
Mm-hmm. The idea of a deep state or an administrative state or sort of like an intel community functioning in almost all governments, there were always people moving behind the throne.
Yes.
Because it's never just vested. That's the one thing I always find funny in these movies. My wife and I, she's like, why do people even work for that guy? Like, why is all these henchmen running around doing this job? It's like, well, because it's simplified, because it's hard for us to grasp that there are these shadowy figures that are moving around and they're connected and they may not even know each other, but they have co-aligned interests. And so you don't have to actually have communication or covert comms. Everyone's like, oh, this is bad for me. I'm going to take actions. I'm going to pull these strings. And when 50 people that have all the money are pulling all the strings, they never had to call each other up and have a meeting or like, an X-Files style, like dark men in a dark room smoking cigarettes. They just know what they need. And if it means that somebody's going to have to die up front and we're going to have to discredit them, then that happens. And it's been going on for, I guess, thousands of years.
The most powerful man in Rome is what's called the Praetorian Prefect. He's the guy that's in charge of the Praetorian Guard. And if you want to look at where we are modernly, I've written some X threads about this. I think you could compare him that post very well to someone like Barack Obama, right? If you look at Joe Biden's taken out of power, and who's the last one to endorse Harris? That's Obama, right? Because does he actually think this coup is a thing? So I think very often in any sort of political situation, there's a puppeteer behind the scenes you don't know about. I think oftentimes we think that by voting a person out of office or by changing political parties, we change what's actually happening to us. But these power structures are set up in such a way that they're able to control things no matter who's in office.
Yeah, that's the kingmaker role that people used to talk about a lot more. I don't hear that as much.
No.
That sort of concept. But it was a thing that if somebody endorsed you, you get to take the throne. You may not be able to be in charge of the throne, right, but you can sit on it.
But you also wonder, like, how many things behind the scenes is this person doing, right? Like, how many people did this person make sure got into Congress, or how many things that are happening in Congress because this person selected them and then got all the votes together, what they might be. I don't think these things happen as organically as we want to believe. I do think there's a lot more control behind the scenes. Not that I believe everything is controlled opposition, but at the same time, I do think there's a lot more control to it than we think.
All right, let's look down the road. We got a couple different forks we could take, probably as you kind of experience the world. We've got November being one kind of inflection point possibility, some break-offs, and then maybe 2028. How do you see, maybe weigh them for me, the way that you see these things going based on looking back in history and then looking forward to what might be in front of us?
I don't think November matters as much as people want it to believe. I'm somebody that I like President Trump. I'm going to vote for him in November, but I think at the same time, it actually doesn't matter as much as people want to think it does. Sure, it's a consequential election, and Harris scares the crap out of me. That smug look last night, man, I couldn't handle that. But I think the bigger thing is getting back to organizing local communities, because our government has to start functioning by a constitution, which is not where we've been. So we have to take a look at getting involved in local communities and functioning more by the 10th Amendment. And unless that starts happening, we're in trouble. Now, I think if you want to look at how we fix the whole thing, I think the person you actually want to look at is Constantine. Constantine is a very interesting individual. And if you look at somebody that would have lived during his time period, the thing they would often credit him with is currency, which is interesting because people say, well, he's the first Christian emperor since he's baptized on his deathbed. But the thing Constantine actually does, and it's a major reason that the Eastern Empire survived, is around 314 to 315, because our calendar is just a little bit different than theirs. In a city called Trier in Germany, he mints less than 100 gold coins. And then what he's going to start doing is, as he's making the empire more Christian, he's going to start taking all the pagan gold statues and stuff and melting them down. And he's going to use those to mint more gold coins. Every single year, he's minting gold coins. Anytime that they bring a new people into the empire, he's going to take their gold and he's going to mint gold coins. So by the time you get to when he dies in the 330s, the Eastern Empire is on a gold standard. And that gold standard is going to last from the 330s until the year 1000 without inflation at 24 karat gold piece. It's a 6.3 gram gold coin. And it becomes a very standard form of coinage. Now, the problem that you have in the Western Empire's crisis is because regular metals and coins were losing their value so fast, people start hoarding gold and not trading in it. The thing that Constantine does is he actually makes taxes forced to be paid in gold. So now he's forcing gold into circulation. So then people start using gold in the marketplace more. So that is something that it's not done all at once, because I think if you flipped our currency all at once, you would just destroy the system, right? Because we're so far over our skis. You have to think Rome was in a worse condition than we are. If they're at 15,000% inflation by 284, they're able to take that and over a 30-year period get the Eastern Empire on a gold standard. Well, to me, I think that's something that I would have a lot of hope in. If we can handle our currency, we can handle a lot of things here, man.
It's an interesting thing. I thought you were going to go with a spiritual aspect to it, but the money is far more
well,
pragmatic.
No, because the thing that Constantine does is he starts favoring Christians in political positions because he has this conversion, but it doesn't really become a Christian empire until 370. So it takes a long time to get to that. But the thing he does, which is fully implemented by his death, is this gold standard. And I think if you look at that, currency is one of the big things that solves a country, because if you don't have currency and you don't have borders, you don't have a country.
Do you think our leaders knew that? Do you think they know that now with this lack of education that we have that's running across the rest of the country?
I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it, because I don't know, man. And even as much as I like Donald Trump, I don't see him quoting, rhetoric and things like that of Greek and Roman philosophers. I think we've lost so much of these things and even awareness of what has worked before in history. I know Harris has talked about price controls as one of the things that she's going to do to fix things. In 284, Diocletian, who's the guy that actually fully divides the emperor between East and West, he does these famous reforms, one of which is a currency reform, which falls flat. Another thing is he breaks up the empire into smaller pieces that are called dioceses, which is actually still the word that the Catholic Church uses today for the divisions.
Right.
And the other thing he does is price controls. Price controls fails so badly because what it ends up doing is it creates a black market now, because Well, people just don't want to use your currency. They're just going to trade amongst themselves. And it drives inflation crazy because, well, now they're just going to devalue the money more because they want more coinage. So that's the problem you run into is these things have failed throughout history, whether it be Diocletian's price controls or the ones of Mao or the ones of Stalin. We do these things throughout history. It doesn't mean it's just going to work this time.
But has it ever been properly tried?
I hate that excuse, man. Like, communism has never worked, but it's going to work this time. Trust me.
So one of the things that I did as a sort of a capstone, it was an undergrad capstone in an honors program, was we looked at utopian works of literature. And we analyzed them for what are the common elements of a utopia. And they basically came down, I kind of mentioned it earlier, 3 things. You have to either have a perfect people, which doesn't exist. You have to have a perfect land with infinite resources, and that doesn't exist. Or you have to have a perfect system of government that somehow compensates for the lack of resources or the lack of the people. And of course, that doesn't exist either. And it seems like the America had the best shot at all of it because they had a quote unquote good and moral people, if we believe that. And it seems like that was more or less true previously. And a pretty good system and a lot of natural resources. So they had a pretty much like the best of all 3 that you couldn't, it was never going to be perfect. And we seem like we've lost a big chunk of a lot of those things.
But it just goes back to the political classes, man, because that's the problem we always run into is the people that want to be in power shouldn't have it. And the people that don't want to have power should have it, right? Like, I think that's the problem we run into because we're too busy building businesses and raising families and adding value to society. And you look at somebody like Chuck Schumer, the guy has never held a job. And I think that's the problem you run into with people that get into politics is they get into politics because they want power and they want invites to the dinners and they want to meet other famous people. Well, we're too busy raising our families and adding value to society.
And feeding the chickens.
Feeding the chickens, man. I got 2 dozen of those little bastards.
Are they the gateway to conspiracy thinking, do you think?
I don't know, man. And I run into this problem where every August and September they stop laying. So right now I'm getting no eggs out of my chickens. I've been borrowing them from my mother-in-law's chickens, but I don't know why mine just stopped laying in September and August. So we're upset with them right now.
Is that a normal thing that they go through these cycles for everybody has chickens that do that?
I don't really know. I just know mine tend to do it every October or every August and September. When it gets real hot, they'll stop laying for a bit. And when we get to kind of the end of September, they just start laying again normally. So I don't know if it's just everybody's chickens or my chickens. I've had them for 5 or 6 years, but that's what ends up happening.
We need to crowdsource the answer to this quandary because that's a real problem. You can't have that. People, if you're people are saying yes in the chat, but I don't know what the yes means. If that's common, like let us know why. I need to know. We're not chicken scientists here. We're looking at the world and seeing the problems. I'm trying to think of a kind of a final wrap up. You've got a lot of hope going in here. How much do you think the spiritual awakening is going to impact the political sphere? Is that something, is one driving the other? Is it bad politics makes people go back to church?
I think that's tough because I think if you look at it, people that have seen, I think the pandemic's a good example of this, right? To see that much evil, there has to be good. And I think that's what I've ended up hearing from a lot of people is they've had spiritual awakenings because if it can be this bad, then to just think life is like this way is a little sad. There has to be something else. And I think that's what actually sends people into looking for something is when you truly see and truly experience evil, then you realize that there is an opposite of that and that's good. And I think that's what drives people to a spiritual awakening.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Also, people can't believe that their life would be like this. And then they look into history and they realize that, yes, this has been happening over and over again, even within our own country. We've run through some cycles.
Yeah. And people are wearing WWJD bracelets. They're not wearing what would Thomas Hobbes do bracelets where life is nasty, brutish, and short.
That is very true. All right. Tell people what you guys do on your podcast. Obviously, I've been a part of it, but give people kind of a sense of what you're about over there and what they can find if they come follow you.
Yeah, so I have the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show. We talk about the events in history that you're not supposed to know about and a lot of the things, even in popular culture, you're not supposed to know about because there's other people out there handling politics, but I'm all about education since I've had a teaching background and everything else. I also run a company called Command Your Brand, and we are a PR firm for the podcast industry, and we are big about getting free speech out there. And that's the number one reason I do what I do is to educate. So it's the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show, and our company is commandyourbrand.com.
How much time do you spend on X on a day? Because I put your link to your X profile in the description for folks.
Way too much, and my wife is often taking my phone away from me to get me to do a little bit less.
We share that experience too. Do you log
She's
out
like, it's
on
Sunday.
weekends?
Remember, you're not supposed to be using your computer.
That's exactly it, though. I mean, and I've actually started surrendering the account where I just don't touch it from Friday, sometime in the middle of the afternoon. I won't touch it until Sunday night when I know I've got to get back to work.
What I've started doing even too. So we live on a lake. So we take the kids to the beach and the lake a lot. I've started just leaving my phone home because I know if I have it, I'll end up checking it or using it. So I've gotten better at just like leaving my phone places.
You're aspiring to that Gen X life that I was born next to. That analog life is actually it's a pretty good thing. Maybe that was when we were a proper country.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like I remember before cell phones, I remember before computers and all that. Because you got to remember, I was born in the mid '80s, so like I do remember a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, I was at the beginning of the '80s, and I still connect more with people from the '70s than I do with people that were born in the '90s.
That's kind of interesting because I feel like I connect more with people that are in your generation than I connect with people that are kind of like, I guess, millennialists, because I guess I'm on the edge of it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's definitely the case. It comes from having analog experience, being able to unplug. Maybe it was an 8-bit Nintendo or something. But Jeremy, thanks so much for joining me this morning. I think that was probably interesting for folks. I hope you'll come back and we'll probably touch this again, and maybe we'll see what happens in November and do it again for that, because then we can have a little bit more hope depending on how it goes.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me, and I just hope we can, make this country a better place, because I believe with, the right education and kind of more of a spiritual awakening, I think we can do that.
I think we can too. All right. Have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to wrap up over here with my folks. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us for the program. I'm going to do a sponsor read that I don't always do, but I want to show you guys something. I grabbed it from my downstairs. Shield Arms, if you guys want to support a company that works out of Montana, that is a pretty wonderful place to be. ShieldArms.com. You can use the promo code Kyle to save 5% site-wide. I brought these up specifically because these are the magazines that I carry. If you're interested in your own personal freedom, especially if we get some bad policies out of the White House, you're going to want them now versus later. These hold 15 where the normal Glock magazines hold 10. It's a 50% increase. You guys can do that for your Glock 43, your 43X, your 48. Check them out. And then also their magazine base plates are pretty epic here. So I can't show handguns on YouTube, but I can show you these. This is a +2 over here in the silver and a +5. You can really make these things do a serious capability. And if you're not carrying a handgun that's going to keep your family safe, and you live in a place where you think that might be necessary, especially if you're in an urban area, I highly encourage you guys to check them out. So again, it's shieldarms.com. Use the promo code Kyle. You can see some of their handguns or their firearms if you guys go to Cabela's or Bass Pro, whatever. But buy them through the website, go direct, and you'll get a better deal. And you'll support a good company in Montana. It's for shooters, by shooters, and the guys who run the company and own the company are, in fact, shooters. Good stuff. Okay, I've got a 5-star review for you guys today coming up here. This is from, who is this? DD Scatene. I hope I said that correctly. The Suspendables, you misspelled a little bit, but we're going to give you some grace. American Patriots, 5 stars. I don't always agree with Kyle, but I know when I listen to his show, regardless of party, I'm going to get 100% truth, according to an actual patriot who's been an FBI agent, who knows how the government works and honestly cares and loves our country. God bless Kyle Seraphin. Get some sleep, Kyle, and lose those bags. You know what? I do the best that I can do. I would like to lose the bags under my eyes, but I can't always do it. I've got a palate cleanse for you guys today. I know that was a little bit of a heavy historical lesson, so let's go to one of the other amusing people in the world out there. Jordan Peterson impersonators. Not actual Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson impersonator. This is one of the funniest things that you guys will hear in a while. I think Jordan Peterson would like this too. I can't remember if we played it last night, but I'm playing it for you right now.
Having your own home's like having your own tortoise shell. You can hide in it all day and never stick your head out. People say, well, what if you don't have your own tortoise shell? Well, there's no saving you. You're probably going to be mauled by hyenas. What if I don't live in Africa? There's no hyenas where I live. Well, it depends on what you mean by hyenas. Hyenas come in many forms. Hyenas can be that one friend who's high on bath salts and steals all your money to buy lingerie. Like, oh yeah, that's a real confidant. Having a friend that betrays you's like eating Chipotle for years and then dying of bacteria the 100th time. You trusted the naked burrito bowl and it damn well killed you. Now the question is, do you or do you not blame Mexico? To be betrayed is like making love to the Albanian woman of your dreams and then in the morning she rolls over and whispers in your ear, I'm actually Estonian. What do you do then? Well, as history shows, you've been double-crossed by all of Eastern Europe. To be betrayed is like having your pet panda bite your throat in your sleep. Here it is for years, just eating bamboo. Now it has a taste for flesh. You may be asking, what are you doing with a pet panda? None of your goddamn business, bucko.
I have no idea what any of that means, but it did make me laugh because that's a pretty darn good impression of it. Guys, follow my guest today. His name is Jeremy Ryan Slate, Slate. And you can follow him on Twitter at Jeremy Ryan Slate, or you can find him at jeremyryanslate.com. Makes it really easy. My kind of guy. Thanks so much for joining us for the program today. I hope that was edifying. I hope that was something that imparted a little bit of knowledge and maybe a little bit of hope too. I feel the same way. Although this is an important election, I don't think it's going to bring it to our knees. I don't think that one way or another this country is destroyed, that the Constitution is shredded. It's important. It's obviously something we want to see success in. But there have been some really, really wild times. And I think looking back at history and realizing that other countries, other empires, other peoples have come back from a brink that was even worse than our own is worth knowing. Be careful with your panda ownership out there today. Once it gets a taste for flesh, it is all over. I have no idea what that means either. Thanks so much, guys. We're going to be back tonight with the call-in show on Locals. It's Locals. The local show is KyleSerafin.com, KyleSerafin.com. Join us over there, and we'll see you this evening. Probably 8:30 Central Time is what we've been doing. Until then, God bless you. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.